Good afternoon and welcome to week 4 of the 6 weeks to Flexible Work and Life Success Insights series. I'm Callie Williams-Yost, and this series is part of a broader effort to bring leaders, managers, teams, and individuals together to reimagine work and life through this COVID-19 crisis and beyond. Today, we are going to talk about leveling up, specifically as it relates to how we are communicating and coordinating with our direct reports, our colleagues, and our customers. But before we do that, I want to introduce my producer, Lauren, who is with me again today. Hi, Lauren.
Hello, everybody.
So with that, without further ado, let's talk about leveling up. And how do we start to communicate and coordinate with each other even in a more effective way? So before we get started, I want to throw a question out there for you guys to think about for the next few minutes before we get to the Q&A. What is one way that you have found you are really effectively communicating as we work in this new, flexible, evolving normal of COVID-19? What is one of the most effective ways that you have found you are communicating, whether it's with your direct reports, whether it's with your colleagues, whether it's with your customers? I want to hear what you're doing. And I want to know if you've done anything different since you first started all of this, if you've taken it to the next level, and what did that look like? So let's get started. Let's begin by first talking about where we are. If weeks 1 and 2 were best described as, oh my gosh, what's happening? And week 3 was described as, okay, so now what's next? I'm going to say we pretty quickly moved into, okay, and now so it begins. This has basically happened just in the past week, and I'm finding it very encouraging. 2 voices just over this weekend, 2 very powerful voices essentially said what I said in my op-ed 10 days ago, which is work flexibility has to be front and center to any economic and health recovery plan that we are going to put in place. We had Eric Schmidt on Face the Nation essentially saying we need to reimagine work. And then shortly thereafter, we had the governor of Maryland say that people are going to have to keep teleworking, and for jobs that don't allow that, workplaces are going to have to adapt. So we are well on our way, and we've gone actually past what is this going to look like to now how are we going to operationalize this? Because as we've been discussing for the past 4 weeks, ultimately what this is going to have to look like is strategic work flexibility, where managers, teams, and individuals are leveraging the work flexibility, technology, and workspaces. Now, a lot of it's off-site, remotely right now, but it could be starting to shift more on-site as well, with strategic, coordinated intention in this very much evolving, flexible new normal of COVID-19 to do our jobs, to run our businesses, to manage our lives, and to regain the momentum of the economy in a healthy and safe way. And that is going to require a combination of all the following: remote work, staggered schedules, alternating A and B teams, redesigned workspaces, and technology. This is the infrastructure that we talk about. Now, what concerns me a little bit is we still tend to talk about all these pieces of the infrastructure in a very siloed way, and that's not going to get us there. So we have to first and foremost begin to understand that all of these things have to come together in a coordinated whole. So as we talk about them and think about them in terms of implementation, how are we pulling them all together into a toolkit, if you will, that then we can lay the culture of shared leadership over to activate it, to leverage it, and to use it. Because that infrastructure isn't going to get us where we need to go if we aren't figuring out how we're going to leverage it to plan, to communicate, to coordinate, and to execute together. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is what are some of those ways that we can be communicating and coordinating even more effectively now that we are at least 2 months, if not 10 weeks into this rapid reset in the way that we work. So let's go back. Before we begin, let's look way back. It seems like 17 years ago, but actually it was only 10 weeks ago when the article that I wrote for HBR appeared, when I talked about your emergency remote work plan, which at the time I hedged to say, well, if nothing happens, then the worst thing is that you have now a plan for the next crisis. And if we only knew where we would be 10 weeks later. But in that article, I talked about 5 things that an organization is going to want to do as they think about how they're going to want to reimagine work as they move into addressing COVID-19. And the first thing was, which is almost quaint, is to acknowledge the possibility that all or part of your workforce may need to work remotely. Well, we now know what happened, and many, many people are. And I also talked about how you need to map out jobs and tasks that could be affected, which was everybody. And I think one of the benefits from this period is the awareness that, wow, things I thought could not be done in a flexible, remote way really can be. And how do we now take that to the next level, into the next phase of all of this, and creatively reimagine how, when, and where we can work in this next phase going forward. So hopefully that mindset shift of the rapid change and what people were able to do can open up the thinking as we move into the next phase. But specifically, I then talked about how you have to audit your IT, the available hardware and software, and understand what is the adoption rate and how are people using them. And then if there is a gap in adoption and utilization, to close that gap. Here's the truth. Most organizations went into this crisis and into having to work in a flexible, remote way with a very inconsistently adopted toolkit of technology. Most technology that I have found in most organizations is not broadly adopted. It's not utilized to its fullest extent. So it's going to be interesting to see 10 weeks into the crisis response if that has changed. And we're going to talk about what that might look like. And then, how are you communicating with each other? You needed to go into the crisis with a communications protocol. When you are not physically coming into the workplace every day and people are working in a flexible, remote way, you have to be much more intentional about how you're communicating with each other, how you're using the tools that you have available to you in an intentional, thoughtful way. And finally, I talked about how you want to keep thinking about how you're measuring success, because you want to be able to go back and look at where you've been and use those metrics to continue to improve. And hopefully that's been happening. I put that in there because my thought was the genie is out of the flexibility bottle with this. And so you're going to have to figure out what worked and then determine how you're going to move forward. But as it's becoming clear, we're going to be in this flexible new normal for a long time. You still have to do that ongoing learning and measuring process. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about leveling up, specifically coordination and communication, those last 3 points in the article. And we're going to talk about how we're going to use the next level of IT software and hardware. What could that communications protocol look like? Not only how you're communicating, but where you're communicating, how you're using your workspace as well. And we're going to follow the same principles. The principles still hold, okay? So we are still in a crisis. We are now just managing through the next level of reimagining work and life as we begin to reopen, as the safe at home mandates begin to ease, as we begin to think about what do our workspaces need to look like in order to allow us to regain the momentum of the economy, do our jobs, manage our lives, but do it in a safe and healthy way with very limited testing, without any contact tracing, and with no treatment right now. So this is the next level of innovation, and we're going to want to start with keeping it simple. Everybody will know when this all rolled out and this all began to become real, I was very clear that this is not the time to take on some crazy new type of technology, some very radical different way of measuring performance. Like, you want to start with where you are and you want to keep it simple, and that remains so. So you want to think about where you are right now, 10 weeks in, and begin to build on that, because it's going to require a next level of experimentation where it's about intention and not perfection. As you all know, we talked about that S-curve of learning with Whitney Johnson, my interview with her. This can be kind of messy as you just figure out what works and learn and then take it to the next level as you keep prioritizing, making sure what matters is happening. You're communicating so people know what's going on. They know what's happening with each other and how they're expected to execute. And then you're recalibrating to make sure you're leveraging the learning. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how you're recalibrating and now leveraging the learning, but you're going to keep it simple and you're going to start with where you are right now and you're going to start to experiment. And again, that is what we are going to talk about. So these principles still hold as we move through the next level. So I thought it would be really helpful. Okay, so as we think about going to the next level, as a manager, as a team, as an individual working in this flexible COVID-19 new normal, it's helpful to look to people who have already gone before us. And I thought I would reach out to my friend, Sarah Milstein, who has just the most vast experience successfully leading remote and distributed teams. And I wanted her to talk to us about what she does from this space of having already experimented with what this could look like. It wouldn't have made as much sense to you if we had talked about it 4 weeks ago, because you weren't far enough along to have a context for what Sarah would now share in terms of going and leveling up, how you're communicating and coordinating with each other. So I interviewed Sarah. Her interview is archived on the page and on the YouTube channel. I urge you, it's 30 minutes. It's a great conversation. She is walking on her treadmill the entire time, so it's very impressive how she is doing a well-being, physical well-being tweak in her quarantine daily routine while we're talking. And she shares some wonderful, wonderful tips and insights, and I'm going to share a few with you right now. And just so you know, Sarah is the Senior Director of Engineering for MailChimp, so she knows what she's talking about. So again, let's dive in and look at some of her highlights, her suggestions. So the first one we talked about is this defining what the water cooler is. We both are hearing the same thing. People wanting to recreate the water cooler. I miss the water cooler. How do you make that water cooler moments happen? And so we talked about what people are really saying when they're referencing the water cooler. And we've decided it's that informal exchange. And it's often personal. It's just checking in with the people you work with. So she shared an example of what they're doing currently in MailChimp, where they're having people share weekend pictures on Slack. And what that does is it allows you to see what your colleagues are doing over the weekend, kind of recreates that, hey, I went down to the farmer's market this afternoon or on Sunday afternoon, or, I watched a great show on Netflix, or I rearranged my closet, or whatever people did. They took a picture of it and they put it on Slack, and it gave people a chance to comment. And people have loved it. They really have liked it. So another example is work related. So I have a client where the water cooler, as they defined it, is how more experienced staff would exchange information and knowledge with more junior staff. And so we talked about how could that be recreated in their culture, and because we wanted to start with where they were, and they did not have an advanced messaging or chat system in their organization. So we got a general email address that would go to all of the more senior people and the more junior people if you sent a message to this address. And when the junior person had a question, they would type it into this email address to send a message. It went to everybody. So all the junior people saw the same question, which was great. And it gave the more senior people a chance to respond, all of them, in their own unique way. And then an administrator would take what was put in that email exchange and put it into a cloud-based folder that was searchable. So they had an archive of what the question was and what the answers were. So again, this was a way for them to recreate the water cooler as they moved to a more flexible and remote work culture. So the next one is, how do you communicate really important information? I think this is something that is of concern to leaders, that how do I get people to understand when something is really critical and I need them to fully pay attention and grasp what I'm trying to say? Well, as Sarah suggests, that's when you have to think about communicating across multiple channels, the same message. So for example, she was talking about an important issue that she had, and she put it out on video, she put it through an email, and she also put it out on Slack. So lesser important messages, maybe not so much communication, but for those that are important, really think about all the options along all the different channels that you have. Make sure whatever technology and communication channel you're using is additive and not just one more burden. And this is more of a mindset shift than anything. I do hear, actually, in organizations that new technology is often seen as a burden. It is not contextualized for people. It is, a lot of times people aren't trained. And again, you have varying degrees of people using it. So it sometimes can feel like something more you need to do. But Sarah suggests to step back, especially in this environment, and say, if I am using this technology or I'm using this platform really well, or this communication channel super effectively, how is it going to make my job better? How is it going to make my work more effective? And if you can frame it that way and see how to apply it in an additive way, it actually can help you take everything to the next level indeed. Test features of the collaboration technology you already have. This goes back to what I've seen many times, which is we really suboptimally use the technology we have. We are not using it to its highest and greatest uses. And I would say an example would be Slack channels. So you can take Slack channels a whole lot of different ways. You can use all sorts of emojis and all sorts of things that you should explore. And I have a client who uses a Slack channel for sharing not just work, but also personally. So sharing COVID recipes that people are doing, and they have a book club that they're running in a Slack channel. So be creative about how you're using the features within the platforms that you already have. And also, I use Slack here, but Team also has a group messaging system that you could also use. Zoom breakout rooms is something Sarah suggested. I have not used that, and it's intrigued me now. They at MailChimp, I guess, felt like they were having this group meeting where they were going to exchange ideas and catch up with each other, but it was becoming too cumbersome, too many people on the screen, people weren't getting a chance to talk. So they started using the feature where you hit a button, I guess, and you go into a breakout room with a smaller group. And they're experimenting with it. And she said, so far, people feel like it's really working. So it's an experiment though, and she's going to check in a couple weeks and see if that was effective. So again, using the features that are in a technology you already have versus taking on something brand new. And this really, to wrap it up, that she emphasized this, and I think this is true. If you're a manager, this is not all on you. And if you're part of a team, why don't you all get together and suggest some ways that you can level up how you're communicating and coordinating with each other? Maybe there's too much Zoom. I gotta say, I think there are people feeling like the Zoom calls are just, the video chats are too much. Maybe go back to being on the phone. I've actually started using phone without the video more, and I did that before. I don't know why I stopped. I don't know why being in a pandemic makes you have to be on video all the time. And you know what? It's fine. So talk to each other about how you're going to communicate, come up with a protocol that maybe is testing something new, and give it a try and just experiment. Now, I'm going to share a story that somebody wrote to me about, which I thought was really was a good illustration of how also communication can be determined about where you're working. I think our workspaces, especially if we're working remotely, 10 weeks into this, 8 weeks into this, 10 weeks into this, really we're starting to get a sense of what that's going to have to look like for us to be our best. And this is going to be a marathon. This is not going to be a sprint. And as it becomes clear that for a lot of us, and in many cases, there's going to be at least some element of remote to how we are working, we're starting to rethink not only how we're using technology, but what our space is going to look like. So here's a story that I thought was great to illustrate this point. So she reached out to say that she is in week 8 now. And everybody can relate to this. Some day it feels new, and other days it feels like it's forever that we've been doing this. And she talked about how she has moved her workspace around her house, like 10 different places, trying to figure out where the optimal space is. And then she was recently asked to facilitate a virtual forum with her organization's CEO and president, and everybody in the whole organization was going to participate in this virtual session that she was going to facilitate. So the night before, she decided that the best place really is turning out to be her bedroom, and this niche in her bedroom. So the night before, she spent time sprucing it up, and she talked about how they moved the bed, they shifted the furniture, they hung artwork, they covered the heat ducts. She almost painted, but then she decided that's kind of crazy, so she wasn't going to do that. But then she said 600 people tuned in, and it was important to her that that background was behind her. And she wasn't even sure anybody noticed, but for her, that made a difference. And, you know, really, she laughed. She said, I am aware of how mentally and physically I felt more prepared based upon how I was not only using the technology that was available to me, but also how I had created the space and what that communicated to the people on that call that I was working with. So again, she, over this time, has realized, okay, I'm more effective in this space in my room, and I'm going to create the actual workspace I'm going to be working in going forward. So what we've done to help you, as we try to every session, is we've created a little tool, and it will be archived on the Flex Strategy Group COVID-19 page. But there's some questions about leveling up technology. Are there advanced features in the existing technology that you have that most people have adopted already? So you're not asking people to take on something new without already mastering what they should be doing anyway. But is there a next level feature that could really enhance your communication and coordination? Remember, you want it to be additive and not just another burden. And then what are one or two of these features you could experiment with? And what does that look like? And reach out and ask others you work with. What could we be doing maybe better and smarter in terms of how we're coordinating and communicating with each other and leveraging that technology? And in terms of communication, what do you mean by the water cooler? When you say that to yourself or to other people that you miss that, what is not happening and what could happen and how could you replicate that? And experiment. I gave you a couple examples, but experiment. And when you have communications that are very, very important, what are some of the channels you could use simultaneously to make sure that message gets through and is seen and heard? And for maybe the next level down communications, what would those channels be as well? Because remember, you don't want everything to be super important, so you start flooding the channels so nobody pays attention. So being thoughtful about very important communications, what are the channels, and then next level down, what might that look like as well? And again, this will be PDF'd up on the site. So what's next for Thursday? We're going to take this coordination and communication topic to the personal, and we're going to talk specifically about caring for and coordinating with those you love and live with. In this crisis reality, the truth of the matter is it's complicated for a lot of us. There are 45 million children who are not in school and will not probably be in school until September. And that's reality. And if you're a leader contemplating how you are going to move into the next level of a flexible work strategy for re-engaging in the workplace, that has to be part of the consideration. And if you're a parent, obviously it's a huge part of your consideration as well. And that's not even to mention the children who are not in childcare because their childcare centers are not open, and all of the many adults who do not have access to their regular elder care. This is real and important. And then you add to that just simply the coordination with all the other people in your physical living space who are trying to work and live and go to school, and how do you just coordinate all of that with them? So we're going to talk about this. I'm not, I'm going to be honest to say I'm not going to be able to solve each of those problems, but my goal is to share with you some tools and resources I think can be very helpful. I'm going to talk to you about a tool called a care map that has been put out by a group called Atlas of Caregiving. It's a fantastic tool. I'm going to introduce it to you and share with you how possibly it can help you coordinate the care in this new, evolving, flexible normal. I'm going to talk about Stu Friedman and Alyssa Westred's Parents Who Lead book. It helped me. It's sort of a framing for how to approach parenthood in a complex, difficult time. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And finally, I'm going to talk about Jennifer, I never say her name right, Petriglieri's Couples That Work at Home Survival Series. I think she talks about a lot of interesting parts and around that complex dynamic of coordinating with somebody that you love to not only get the work done, but also take care of all these other personal realities. So we're going to talk about that on Thursday. So with that, any questions? I'm going to ask you guys though, how have you been coordinating? I want to hear communicating and coordinating over these last 2 months in a way that was particularly effective.
We have 2 responses, Callie.
Yeah.
We have so far.
Okay.
Sarah says town halls using WebEx.
Okay.
And then Janice says being vulnerable, describing some of my concerns and issues with authenticity, not trying to act like everything is okay.
That is very, very important. So I think town halls and WebExes are a great communication vehicle because everybody's hearing the same message, which is terrific. And, I know another leader who was saying that they've then broken those town halls into smaller groups for more targeted messaging, but that broader message happens and then breaking it down into who needs what more specifically of that broader message as well. And Janice, I can't agree with you more about the vulnerability. I think, it's that balance between empathy and performance and making sure we're all empathizing with each other and knowing this is not an easy time, and what can we do to support each other and how can we help each other keep moving forward? I think that's really important. Anybody else?
We have 2 more so far.
Oh, good.
Grace said one-on-one conversations on a weekly basis, holding open office hours on Zoom. And Nadia says WhatsApp group for our team where no work is communicated, just fun pictures,
Oh,
gifts, pictures from walk and talk meetings, etc. One-on-one calls without slides taken on walk-in talks.
that's great. That's great. All those ideas are so fantastic. And I personally think are things we should keep doing, even as we move over the next few months into this new combination of how, when, and where we're working, where maybe not everybody's remote or as many people are remote and some are in the office, some are out. All of these things are fantastic. And I think they should continue. So thank you very much. We'll share that in the highlights section, the ideas that all of you had. So thank you very much. So any other questions? Any other comments?
That's it.
All right, great. Well, I can't let all of you go without a little Rosie time. I got to tell you, as we move into this next phase where we're going to operationalize all of this, this is where we're really going to have to take everything to the next level. It's going to be about that coordination of all the infrastructure, but also that culture piece where how we are going to be planning with each other, coordinating with each other, and executing in a very, very different model of shared leadership than we were before this crisis. So, but the exciting part is we can do this, we can do it in a way that helps us continue to reimagine work and life in a healthy, safe, and effective way. So thank you all for joining me. I really look forward to seeing you on Thursday when we dive into caregiving and coordinating with those we love and live with. So until then, have a good one.